Before we get started in Joshua chapter 6, verse 1, we need a little backstory, okay? We need a little backstory of what has happened so far. Now, the Israelites are led by a character named Joshua. Joshua, if you did not know, is the Hebrew word of the Greek word Jesus. Interesting. He was the one that led the Israelites into the promised land. The law, or Moses, was not the one that led the Israelites into the promised land. But Jesus himself, oh my goodness, that's a sermon in and of itself, okay, led them into the promised land. Now, how they got into the promised land, there was this crazy event that happened where they had the Ark of the Covenant lead in front of the people, and they stepped into the middle of the Jordan, and it specifically tells us that it was the time of harvest, and the time of harvest, the rivers of the Jordan would flood the banks. What that means is there was a lot of water, okay? It wasn't just like a little trickle. There was a lot of water. These dudes step into the water, and it says that the Jordan stopped running, and it was dry on the ground. It sounds a lot like the Red Sea. The Red Sea was a little different, though. When it split, it told us that it was on the left and on the right. It was like a wall that they were able to walk through. The Jordan was different. It stopped all the way up in the city of Adam, Westmark. No, not Adam, Westmark. Adam. All the way up there at the city of Adam, which was roughly 30-ish miles up north. It stopped that whole Jordan, and it was dry, and they were able to walk across into the promised land, the land of Canaan, for the first time. Now, as they walk into the promised land, God tells them to circumcise the men for the second time. Some of you just went, what? That sounds painful. Now, what was happening is when they were first in the wilderness, they circumcised the men, and it was to be a reminder to them that they were to be set apart from the world. They were to be God's chosen people. It was a decree that God made to them as a reminder of that they were the Lord's. And then all of you scratched your head because you know, how do you do that 2 times? Okay, what happened, obviously, during the 40 years in the wilderness, the old guard died out. The old guard died out. God promised that their children would be the ones to inherit the promised land. So they did not circumcise continuously through the 40 years. It was just that one time. But as the old guard died out, the young ones, the young boys, were now to be set apart before they went into the promised land. Even before they went and claimed what was rightfully theirs because God promised it, they were called to be set apart. They were called to be set apart. Now that they're set apart, what ends up happening is they go on over and celebrate the Passover. And what's interesting is they eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan, for the first time, and it says this, that the manna ceased falling from the heavens. The moment they ate of the fruit of the land, the promised land, the manna stopped. And that, honestly, in and of itself is a beautiful story and another sermon that we're not going to talk about, but it's significant because the last seasons of provision ended, and God was now leading them into a new provision. And this new provision, in order to receive that new provision, they had to let go of the last provision. That's a story in and of itself, too. My goodness, we have so much to talk about. But before the Battle of Jericho, it was the first battle in the Promised Land. It was a significant battle. It wasn't just like another battle. This was the very first battle. The very first battle in the promised land that God has promised to his people. And we need one more insight of this story before we get started. If you just look at chapter 5, verse 13, let's read that real quick. Something crazy happens. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing opposite him with a sword drawn in his hands. And Joshua went to him, just super casually, I guess, like, hey, what's up, dude? Okay. Went up to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? Verse 14, he said, no, rather, I indeed come now as captain of the hosts of the Lord. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his servant? The captain of the Lord of hosts said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And I love what Joshua did, so he did so. You're going to find out a theme with Joshua as we keep reading, but you're going to find out God said it, Joshua did it. You're going to find out a theme throughout Joshua's life. If God said it, he did it. If God said it, he did it. But man, he meets this character. He has a conversation with this guy known as the commander of the Lord's army. That sounds rad. That sounds so cool. Like, that should be a band name. Okay, you didn't think that was cool. Never mind. Okay. Now, there's a debate upon this, but I think it's pretty evident, self-explanatory within the scriptures of what's happening. There's this debate that people believe that this is just an angelic leader of the Lord's army, which is interesting because typically angelic beings, when someone falls to worship before an angelic being, what happens? Stop. No, don't worship me. What are you doing? Stop. Get up. Don't worship me. But we see throughout the scriptures that there is an angel of the Lord in the Old Testament that we see that appears, and when he appears, people fall in his presence, bow low before him. We also see a similar theme here with this character. If you remember Moses and the burning bush, it was similar. Would you please take off your sandals? This is holy ground you walk on. This is holy ground you walk on. We see Joshua bowing before this angel, the commander of the Lord's armies, and this gives us a glimpse that this is not just any angel, but this, as we see, is actually a Christophany, or Jesus, appearing before he was even born in the New Testament. He appeared to Joshua, and it's so very important that even before the battle starts, what do you see Joshua doing? You see Joshua worshiping the Lord. And I think so oftentimes we are found in a battle, but we were not prepared for the battle we're in because we were not found worshiping the Lord before the battle. And guys, I want you to understand something with me, that you are going to face a battle in your life, whether you like it or not. You need to get a glimpse of this. This isn't just a yay, happy place. Let's be real. The earth has problems. The earth has been infected with sin, a disease that desires to corrupt you and to tear you apart. You have an enemy that is roaring like a lion, seeking whom he devours. You are in a battle. And with that, why wouldn't we want to be found in a place where we are able to worship this God, Jesus Christ, before the battle? And that is key to this story. The reason it is key is worship is an abandonment of self before the Lord to do his will. To do his will. And just look at Joshua. He positioned himself below the Lord's authority so that he could receive the plan of the Lord. He positioned himself below the Lord's authority. And I want you to be encouraged today. When we position ourselves in lowly places, when we position ourselves under authority of the Lord, you need to know that is a place of power. That is not a place of destruction. That is a place where you now have a plan, a purpose, a calling, a joy, a peace. is under the authority of the Lord. He was found worshiping before the battle. And to have the right battle plan, we need to have the right commander. To have the right battle plan, we need to have the right commander. But so oftentimes, I see us positioned under another's authority. Maybe a pastor's authority. Maybe a spouse's authority. Maybe someone that you look up to. Or maybe it's not anyone you look up to, but you've allowed them to have influence in your life. And what ends up happening is you are now taking the battle strategy, the plan of man and not of the Lord. And you already know the plan of the Lord seems quite ridiculous. We're going to read about it in Jericho. It was a very strange parade indeed. It didn't make sense. But let's get going in chapter 6, verse 1. Let's read about Jericho, shall we? Now Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. Remember that. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the valiant warriors. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. Also 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark, when on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow the trumpets. Doo-doo-doo-doo. It shall be that when they make a long blast," I guess it wasn't a doo-doo-doo-doo, it was more like a woo, "with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout." Come on now, shout. We're going to try it one more time. Here we go. "And all the people shall shout with a great shout." I like it. I like it. "And the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up every man straight ahead." Straight ahead. Okay, we need to pause there because there is a few things that we need to hone in. We need to look at Jericho. We need to look at the people of Jericho. We also need to understand this battle plan, okay? This strange parade, as I like to call it. Now, the first verse is very insightful for the rest of the chapter. The first verse is very insightful for the rest of the chapter. It said that Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. We need to hone in on that for a second. Because when we skip over these things, sometimes we don't get the full gravity or the context of what is happening. We need to understand something, that they were in utter fear of the Israelites. Utter fear of the Israelites. I've read many commentators and that they speculate that not only Jericho was shut up, but people in the surrounding areas were intimidated by the Israelites, that they all flooded within Jericho, hiding for safety. Why? Well, we'll get there. Jericho's an interesting fortress. But I want you to get this. In Joshua 5:1 it says, "Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west," so the promised land, "and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted. And there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel." Now get this, Rahab herself, we'll meet her in a second, but Rahab in chapter 2 gave us a glimpse of the unrest within the walls of Jericho, okay? So we found out that God told Joshua, hey, or not God, but they found out the news of the king of the Amorites and the Canaanites that they were trembling, okay? They were nervous because of what? What God did. But in Joshua 2, verse 9, Rahab says this, "I know that the Lord," I love it, Yahweh, "has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you." We're getting a glimpse a little bit more. It wasn't that they just locked up Jericho, but they were in utter panic and fear of the Lord. There was a fear upon them. But it was so interesting, if you read about the Moabites in Numbers 22, the Moabites were so fearful of the Israelites because they understood that the Israelites had a deity on their side. And this deity had authority over the elements, but over also creation. He was able to use that authority as he pleased to advance the Israelites. They've heard of the stories of the Egyptians and all of the things and the plagues of that, and they're losing their mind because they realize their military might was no match for Jehovah, was no match for this deity, Yahweh. And what's interesting, what the Moabites did is they kind of understood, hey, we're not going to beat them. Let's hire a guy who practices witchcraft, sorcery, and divination. His name was Balaam. They hired this dude. He was obviously well known because the kingdom hired him. And he came to curse the Israelites. But even this same angel we saw earlier with a sword drawn, the commander of the Lord's army, shows up in front of Balaam and stops him, but also does not allow him to curse the Israelites. They tried to fight deity with deity, and we found out God is bigger than all these little g gods. That God has the authority even over the principalities of darkness. Dude, that pumps me up. I'm just saying. That is cool. We also get this, that God himself promised the Israelites, promised them that he would cause a fear within the people. If you have ever, watched rugby, the New Zealand All Blacks, if you know about them, they get up in front of the team that they're about to, go to war against, and they full on just do the haka, and you're like, oh my gosh, that is the most intimidating thing ever. Their tongue, have you ever seen the haka? Look it up. It's entertaining. Yeah, it's very entertaining. But that was the intimidation factor. But think about that. Have you ever tried to fight a battle that you were in utter fear about? How well do you think you're going to fight that battle? God put a fear upon them. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 25, it says, this day I will begin to put the dread, and the fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under the heavens, who when they hear the report of you will tremble and be in anguish because of you. Dude, that is really stinking cool. That if we are walking with the Lord, that the enemy is fearful of us, that we cause them to tremble, to squirm, because we have an authority that is bigger than all these little g gods. Whatever this world has to say, we have authority that is supreme ruler, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who is able to speak to the sea and cause it to cease. He's able to see the unrest and calamity within you and cause peace to be present. We have a God, guys, that has that authority. It's so interesting to me, just talking to atheists or agnostics of how they think and process this world, but it's interesting to me. If you just look into the skies and see the stars and how there is order with all of them, but then you hone in on earth, we find out on earth, this precise location, that we are given a space to live that is precisely exact away from the sun so we don't burn or freeze, but it also has an axis that spins so that we don't have summer all day and all year long, but we have different seasons. If you go even further into that, you can look at all the planets and how they rotate around the earth, and you will find out that all of these planets also create a shield of sorts for the earth from meteorites and solar winds and flares and all these things, that we are protected. Get even further out of there, and you look at the atmosphere of the earth. It is ridiculous how the atmosphere of the earth is a sort of shield as well, so that we can breathe. But get this, the trees have exactly what we need, and we have exactly what the trees need. When you look at the immense detail of our body and how we are made up, and you look at the DNA code of a man and how they are made, it is literally a code. If you know how codes work, a code takes a person who has made the code. The code is made to communicate and to be received by a decoder. If you think about words and how we speak, I am the one who wants to communicate a code, language, to you, the decoder, to decipher what I am saying. If you look at the evidence all around us, you understand something, that there has to be an uncaused cause. What that means is if you hit dominoes, the dominoes will hit another domino and another domino and another domino and another domino and so on. But in order for that domino to be affected, there had to be a mover. And if we just look at this with our mind, we can see that there is evidence of a deity that has put things in order, and they are still in order to this day. Why? Because he did not just remove himself from the order, but he has also intervened within this order and has brought things together. And I want you to know this, the world looks bad right now, but it's still under order. It's still under order. And guys, I want you to know this, you have that God on your side, and causes the demons to shudder. Now, with this, verse 2, we see, I love this statement. God says, I have given Jericho. Pause. He didn't say, I will give Jericho. No. He said, I have given Jericho. What this is, the tense of this Hebrew verb is a prophetic, perfect tense. What that means, I have given, is describing a future action as if it was already done. As if it was already done. I have given you Jericho. This is a very important thing to remember for the rest of the story. God has given Jericho. Because how Israel proceeds depends on this prophetic, perfect promise. And I also want you to know something as well. God has made prophetic, perfect promises, that's a lot to say, to you as well. He has made those in your life that you could take to the bank, that you could hold on and have confidence in the face of a battle, because the God who created all things has given you a promise as if it was already done, even if it hasn't happened in your life yet. Victorious Christians are people who know the promises of God because they spend time meditating on God's word. Where you will find those promises, man, is in God's word. We are to believe in God's promise, but we're also to take one step further and reckon it. I love that word, reckon. It's a fun word, reckon. Reckon, if you don't know what it means to count as true in your life. It means to count as true in your life. And what I've noticed, a lot of Christians may understand God's promise, but has not reckoned it in their life, have not applied that to their life. Think of it this way. You accept a check. Woo! That's believing in that money, that dollar bill. But what good is a check if it hasn't been applied in the bank? What good is a check if it has not been cashed in? And in the same way, as we read the Word of God and see the truths of God, remember this, that you are now to reckon it, apply it in your life as well. Okay, let's talk about this. Verses 3-5 we just read. This is the strange parade, the very weird battle plan. That is a very much so God plan and definitely not a man plan. I have never heard of people that just sat together in a meeting, crossed their legs and said, you know what? I know how we're going to win this battle. We're going to walk around the walls. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. I haven't heard that. This is definitely a far out plan. But as we look into the details of this plan, man, we're going to see some weird and fascinating, fun things Typically an ordinary weapon that they would use in this occasion with a city like Jericho, a fortress that is walled by bricks. They would use a battering ram. It's a big tree. They would grab a bunch of guys on each side and say, "Ah!" and then ram the wall. That's a battering ram. Or they would use scaling ladders. They would try to put the ladders up on the wall, climb up onto the wall, jump over, and then invade the city, okay? They would invade the city. Now, with this, though, we see that God gave a different direction. He said, grab your armed men and march around the city once a day for 6 consecutive days with 7 priests blowing 7 trumpets, preceding the Ark of the Covenant. Now, on the 7th day, they were to circle Jericho 7 times, and then the walls of Jericho would fall and the city would be taken. You can say they definitely got their steps in. Yes. Yes, thank you, Ginger. It was funny. I agree. No one else laughed, but you did. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, before we talk about this strange parade, we need to set the scene of Jericho first, okay? When I've heard studies and sermons about Jericho, oftentimes we forget to talk about the people within Jericho. We like to talk about the fortress. We like to talk about God's crazy, just amazing miracles in the Bible. But I think it's good for us to hone in on all of these different scenes. Now, let's look at the citizens of Jericho first, okay? I've, watched VeggieTales, and I've heard, different studies and sermons and how when, the Israelites walked around Jericho, they were laughing and you're so dumb. Look at you walking around. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. The only thing that I see in the Bible is that they were terrified. So I don't think they were laughing. I think there was a serious threat within the walls of Jericho. So much so that Jericho over-prepared. How I know this is we see that they had a spring, don't know if you knew this, but in the west bank of Jericho named, let's see if I can do this, Ian Es Sultan, or Elijah's Spring. This spring was able to bring them water for a long period of time. It continued to bring water to them. So they had necessary resources to bunker down. But not only that, we found out in Joshua chapter 3, verse 15, when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, that it was the time of harvest. What that tells us, that there was also an abundance of food within Jericho in the time of harvest. There are some scholars that legit believe that they could have bunkered down for a couple years without leaving based upon the abundance of food and the plenty of water. They were to fight this battle like turtles. They would hide in a protective fortress, waiting out until the Israelites got tired of trying to fight. So that is how these Israelites were to fight this battle. Terrified, scared, but to bunker down, okay? Now, this is important to note because the typical battle plans of the time when facing a place like Jericho was either by assault or surrounding the city and starving the people within. But we find out surrounding the city to starve them won't be very effective if they're able to bunker down. Invaders also were known to weaken the stone walls with fire, okay? They would torch that bad boy and weaken those stone walls, or they would try to tunnel underneath the walls to get to the other side. We'll talk about why that wouldn't work with Jericho here soon. Or they would try to, unearth a bunch. They would get a big old tractor with a big old dump truck thingy on it. I don't know what they're called. Okay. They would dig up dirt, dump it right in front of the wall, and build kind of like a ramp to go up the walls. We'll find out why that would be a process as well, too, here soon. Each one of these methods of assault took weeks, sometimes even months, and the attacking forces would be heavily hit. There would be a lot of losses. Why? Because there's literally dudes up on top of the wall, arrows, dumping things on their head, big old rocks. It hurts, okay? So they would definitely be hit. Now, the second thing we need to look at, Dougie, would you show that first picture for me? Is how the fortress of Jericho looked. A lot of us, when we think of Jericho, we think that Jericho had one wall surrounding it. We think that Jericho was surrounded by one wall, but I want to argue that with the excavations that we have found, there are actually two walls. Now, let me explain these two walls, okay? Jericho sat on a mound, or it's also called a tell. A mound was a little hillside, okay? Now, this mound had a retaining wall that was 12 to 15 feet tall. The retaining wall sat at the very bottom. It was a stone wall. As you could see on the picture, the lower wall at the bottom is that stone wall. Now, on top of that retaining wall was another wall. This wall was a mud brick wall. It was 6 feet thick and 20 to 26 feet tall. Yeah, it's pretty tall, okay? Now, roughly 15 to 20 feet up the embankment was another wall. This other wall was also a mud brick wall, and it was about 46 feet above ground level where the retaining wall was, so 46 feet up from there. It was not only surrounded by a wall, but if you were to dig under, you would also have to dig way up for quite some time. It was a hard task to do. This retaining wall also was found to sink deep within to hold the mound from falling at any place. They were heavily fortified. It wasn't just a little wall. This was a wall that loomed over them. If you remember when they sent the 12 spies, they came back and said that the land was heavily fortified. It wasn't just sort of fortified. This thing was impenetrable. It was hard to get through. Even if they tried to fight, this wasn't an easy task. If you didn't know, Jericho is roughly 8 to 9 acres. It's not really that big. It was 8 to 9 acres. Dougie, can you show that second picture for me? Also, what we don't know oftentimes is Jericho actually had two cities. It had the upper city and it had the lower city. As you can see, within the top part is the upper city protected by that second wall, but on the underside is the second city. We'll hone in on this when we get there, but the second city is where Rahab would have lived. Rahab would have lived. Okay. Now that we got the groundwork of the people within Jericho and the fortress of Jericho, we need to talk about this battle plan, because this battle plan is going to be fun. Are you ready? Okay. Are you ready? Okay, cool. Right on. I'm a little different than Daniel. When you don't talk to me, I get nervous, okay, and scared. Just talk to me. It's fine. We're doing good. Now, obviously, this battle plan wanted to hone in on the number 7. Did you notice that? Like how many 7s there were? There were 7 priests. There were 7 horns. There were 7 days marching. There was 7 times around Jericho. Now, we need to hone in on this, and we need to search scriptures to look at what the 7 means, because we see it often throughout the scriptures, this number 7. And 7, biblically speaking, represents completeness or perfection. Completeness or perfection. This number 7, completeness or perfection. Now, 7 was also a sacred number to the Jews. It was a very sacred number. The Sabbath was celebrated on the, 7th day. The 7th year was a sabbatical year. After 49 years, 7 times 7, was the year of Jubilee. 3 Israeli feasts are in the 7th month. You have the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. 7 all over the place. What 7 symbolized to the Jews was God's ability to finish whatever he started. Ooh. This was God's way of showing them once more he will complete the task ahead. I love that. That God showed them once more that he was going to complete what he said he was going to do. And all they had to do was be faithful in obedience to the Lord. That they just had to be faithful and obedient. Now, this part is the part that makes me excited, and I might just go too long on it, but hold on, okay? Hold on. Typically, we see in the Bible that the Jewish people would use two different horns, okay? They would use two different horns in their everyday things. We see a silver horn and we see a ram's horn that is used here. Now, let's hone in on a silver horn or trumpet, which is not used here. But a silver trumpet you could find in Numbers chapter 10, if you want to do some research on your own. And it was used for summoning the congregation and for having the camps set out. So if the congregation was out, they would come back in. If it was time to leave, which during the wilderness time, they got up and walked around a mountain. That's what they did for 40 years. And they would blow that trumpet, and they would walk around that mountain and set up another place. It was also to be used as an alarm. If there was an invasion of some sorts, they would blow this silver trumpet. It was also a trumpet that would be used when they go into battle. Interesting. They would blow this silver trumpet. They've actually found evidence of these trumpets, and these trumpets would have upwards of 3 notes. That is kind of like the max out that they would have used. 3 notes that they could use to signal different things, okay? Now, we need to hone in on this ram's horn for a second, because within the horn that they use, there's something that needs to be said about Jericho, and it makes me want to dance because it is exciting. Okay? A ram's horn, a lot of you know, the name of a ram's horn would be a shofar. Okay? Now, a shofar is kind of right, but not as well. A shofar literally means a horn. It's a horn. So yes, it's correct. It is correct, but not. More accurately, if you look at the actual Hebrew of the ram's horn, it's a yovel. Now, this word, we also get jubal, okay, which literally means ram's horn, okay? The yovel, jubal, ram's horn. Now, what's interesting is we actually see a man named Jubal first in the line of Cain in Genesis 4, verses 21. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. Interesting. This Jubal character was the father of the lyre and the pipe. Now, it gets even more fun. Jubal is where we get our modern word for jubilee. Interesting. Okay, let's hone in on this for a second. Jubal is where we get our modern word for jubilee. We also see in Leviticus 25 that describes the year of jubilee. And this year, that they would blow, guess what horn? The ram's horn. Yeah, good job. The ram's horn, yes. They would blow this horn in celebration. Interesting. A ram's horn reminded the Jews of God's provision and means to celebrate. Let's say it one more time. A ram's horn reminded the Jews of God's provision and means to celebrate. Think of another story of a horn and a ram in the Bible. Think about this. Genesis chapter 22, verse 13 says this. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. Oh, baby. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for the burnt offering in place of his son. Come on. The year of Jubilee was a year of celebration, of forgiveness. Get this, just like Abraham was offered a ram caught with his horn in the thicket, we too have a reason to celebrate, to be filled with jubilee, that there was another that took our place. There was another that died in our place. We have every reason to celebrate the amazing grace of God who offered himself in our place, caught in the thicket by his ram's horn. But we also know we have reason to dance in the street, to sing a new song. We have every reason to blow the yobel. We have every reason to dance for joy because of the forgiveness of God. And what is happening here is as they go into a battle that has not been won yet, what are they doing? They are celebrating as if the battle has already been won. Come on. That's where you lose your mind. Yeah. My goodness. That was the most coolest thing to see. To praise in the face of the storm. To praise the Lord in the face of a battle. To understand something, I want to hone in a little bit deeper with praise and specific. Okay, whatever. I can't say that word. But think about this. There is psychotherapy that actually happens where they use music. Where they use music, and this music actually changes the direction of those people. Where they all of a sudden were filled with anxiety and worry, but they use a calming tune and how it can bring peace to the soul. They used music, and what ended up happening is these people would not just feel calm, but also do differently. They wouldn't act out with what they thought of anxiety and worry and be frustrated with the world and hatred, but now there is a peace within, therefore they can walk out that peace. Get this, God is calling us to make a joyful noise throughout our life. And if we are making a joyful noise with the strumming of the guitar, a trumpet, a drum, or with our voice, your voice is a beautiful thing. It is an instrument in itself, and it is capable of doing mighty, amazing things, but it is also able to use for destruction. We have to corral our mouth, our tongue, and use it effectively, but also with understanding. But get this, y'all. If you understand this, we have every reason to rejoice, to celebrate, to make a new song to the Lord each and every single day. I understand your life has its worries. I understand your life is hard. We all have things that we have to carry that hurt us, that burden us. But what I see so often is so many Christians are singing a song of despair and not singing a song of rejoicing, singing a song of celebration. And I want you to understand something, dude. Worship in the way of song, of communicating, of music, dude, it changes the atmosphere of your brain, of your heart, of your soul. Guys, I hope you're found worshiping in the face of the battle, just like the Israelites. Just like the Israelites. The last thing we obviously need to see is the God box. The God box, it's also called the Ark of the Covenant. The God box, what this represented is that God was with them. Where? Well, in the battle. We talked about this when we looked at Judges with Gideon. If you remembered, Gideon didn't have a courageous spirit. He was like, I'm the least of all. But then God's like, no, you're a valiant and mighty warrior. The only reason he was a valiant or mighty warrior is because of who was with him. And in the same way, y'all, you too are a mighty, valiant warrior, not because of how strong you are, not because of how smart you are, not because of your race, your nationality, not because of how much money you make, not because of the clothes you wear, I want you to understand you are a mighty, valiant warrior, saved by amazing grace because of the God that is with you. If you remember, we have a God that causes the enemy to tremble. Let's look at verse 6 and keep on going. Guys, we only have 5 more hours. You're doing great. Doing great. Here we go. Now we're going to see Joshua's response to this battle plan. So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of the Lord." Then he said to the people, "Go forward and march around the city, and let the armed men go on before the ark of the Lord." Verse 8. And it was so that when Joshua had spoken to the people, and the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the Lord went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. Verse 9, the armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while they continued to blow the trumpets. But Joshua commanded the people, saying, "You shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor let a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Be quiet. Then you shall shout." Verse 11. So he had the ark of the Lord taken around the city, circling it once. Then they came into the camp and spent the night at the camp. Verse 12. Now Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while they continued to blow the trumpets. Thus, the second day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did so for 6 days. Verse 15. Then on the 7th day, they arose early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city on the same manner 7 times. Only on the day they marched around the city 7 times. Verse 16. At the 7th time, when the priest blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout." Cool. For the Lord has given you the city. Okay, come on. We need to talk about this. I don't know if you're like me, but when I read this, the entire time I was like, this is the most ridiculous, weirdest thing ever. I love the battle strategy. There's the armed men in front, okay? There is the priest blowing 7 trumpets. There's the Ark of the Covenant behind the priest, and then there's the rear guard, the armed men in the backside, okay? As they are to go around the city, Joshua says, "Hey, shh, don't talk until I say shout. Shh." Typically, when an army would come into a battle, there's usually a battle cry that would take place, and then you would hear the men be intimidating, march in there, and there's a lot of noise that happens in war. If you've been in war, you know about that. With all the guns, they didn't have guns back then, but the guns, they would have swords and all of these different material that is clanging, their armor. It's really loud, okay? But God tells Joshua to tell the people, and he obeyed. Joshua literally obeyed and said, "Do not speak. Do not speak the entire time. Be quiet." And it's interesting because they had to walk around 8 to 9 acres of Jericho. 8 to 9 acres of Jericho would take roughly 30 to 40 minutes walking around. For 30 and 40 minutes walking around, they were to be quiet. Some scholars state that this was done to test Israel, to test the faith of Israel and Joshua, to test them as they obey and walk around this wall. Now, they did the exact same thing 6 days in a row. It just sounds ridiculous. Like, really, it just sounds ridiculous to me. Like walking around these walls, hoping that they'll fall, and just keep on walking. Keep on walking. Now, like I said, some of these scholars believe that this was to test the faith of Joshua and Israel. And we can see why they have that evidence, because in Hebrews 11, the hall of faith, it literally tells us in verse 31, by faith the walls of Jericho fell, after the people had marched around them for 7 days. And I want you to hear me on this. You can read Romans. It talks about this. You do not earn your faith by works, okay? If we are trying to work to get grace and faith from the Lord, that's not how you do it. It's just a contrite heart before the Lord that bows himself under the authority of God, understanding I am not able to save myself, therefore, God, help. That's all it takes, man. But I need us to understand something. Faith, then in James tells us, once faith is set within us and you have a love for the Lord, you need to understand something. That obedience is the clear evidence of the faith within you. If you have faith in God, if you believe in God, then why wouldn't you want to do as he says? Because in so doing, you will find peace and you will find this comfort, this love that is united with the Lord. In the same way of you that are married. If you listen to your wife, it's going to be a good day. Yes. But because you love her, you care for her, you want her well-being, you want that smile on her face, you want to comfort her, to provide for her. And out of that love, you do what is necessary to express that love to her each and every single day. And in the same way is our relationship with the Lord. And I love it, guys. If we truly believe that God is God, then we will desire to obey God. Walk out your faith through obedience to the Lord. I put this, it's very dumb, but roll with it. Obedience is the legs of your faith. Obedience is the legs of your faith. Now, 15 through 16, as we saw, it was the seventh day. They would walk around the walls of Jericho. It would roughly take, for them going around 7 times, anywhere from 3.5 hours to 4 hours of walking around those walls, okay? After they've walked around those walls, Joshua goes, shout! And they shout. Why did they shout? Because they had victory. They already had victory. They were just claiming it right then and there. Then we see an interesting thing that we need to read about in verses 17. So let's keep on going. The city shall be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, so that you do not covet them and take some of the things under the ban, and make the camp of Israel cursed and bring trouble on it. Verse 19. But all the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, the priests blew the trumpets, and when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. Remember that word. So that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. They utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey with the edge of the sword. Verse 22. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the harlot's house and bring the woman and all she has out of there, as you have sworn to her. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city with fire and all that was in it, only the silver, the gold, and the articles of bronze and iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. Verse 15, however, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had Joshua spared. Jesus spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers from Joshua, sent to spy out Jericho. Let's talk about this real quick, and let's zoom on through. Under the ban. The Hebrew word for under the ban is harem. Harem means a devoted thing or appointed to utter destruction. Okay, wow. This was the first victory in the promised land, and it was to be the first fruits to the Lord. God desired the first fruits of this victory. Before they were to go into this promised land, God wanted all of it. Now, everything from this victory was to be burned, to be killed, but the silver, gold, bronze, and iron were to be brought to the treasury of the Lord. Now, verse 18 is interesting because it says, keep one from the things of the band. And I want you to hone in on this, okay? God desired them to not take anything under the ban because everything under the ban was doomed to destruction. Therefore, if you took anything under the ban that was doomed to destruction, you too would be doomed to destruction. Think about this. In the same way, God desired Israel to be set apart so that they could be a royal priesthood, a blessing to this earth. But if they were tainted in any way, they would be covered by that destruction. God desired them to be a people group set apart to be a blessing to us, even in this room. But they were to not take anything from the band. Guess what? Next chapter, Achan. My goodness, dude. He stole some bacon. Okay? And he was killed for that reason. Because everything under the ban was cursed or destruction was to fall upon it. And having that in your possession. Now, the only person that was spared was Rahab. You can read more about Rahab in chapter 2. I recommend you do because her story, man, we'll get there. Her story is a good story. But why, this is a question that I hear often, why would a God of love pour out his wrath upon Jericho? When you read through Joshua, there is a lot of wrath upon these lands of Canaan. Archaeological discoveries of the Ras Shamra tablets give us an insight to the corruption of the cult practices within the land of Canaan. Literally, I did way too much research of Canaanite cults. Sorry, it was weird. I was reading these things about Baal and the Baal cycle with the 7 years of war against the god of Mot. The god of Mot is the god of destruction or death. Baal was this good character, and if Baal won, then there would be land of fertility. But if he lost, there would be just, crops die. Okay, anyways, in these tablets, I wanted to understand what was happening within the land of Canaan. Now, you need to get a glimpse of this. The land of Canaan was so wicked, so perverse, filled with a sexual culture. Literally, everything revolved around sexuality and sex. Everything within the culture. And if you want to get a little glimpse of the culture, you could go read a little bit more in Leviticus 18. God literally wrote Leviticus 18 to warn the Israelites of this culture. But this culture wasn't just stationed in the land of Canaan. It was starting to leak out into the known world at the time. This culture of sexuality, the worship of sex, was starting to spread everywhere. So much so that we find out that the book of Judges wouldn't have had to be written if God listened, or the Israelites listened to God in Joshua. If they wiped out everything, they wouldn't have needed judges to save them from the perversity of the Canaanites. But it reminds me a little bit about our culture today and how our culture today is literally worshiping sexuality and sex everywhere. So much so that it's easy to obtain just by the fingertips that you use to get on your phone or computer or the TV. Sex is everywhere. It literally, advertising companies hone in on this because they understand sex sells. And what is happening is the enemy is trying to get us confused about our sexuality. In so doing, get us confused as to who we are and how we were made. We were made with a purpose, y'all. Just like a Tesla. I've already said this, but if a Tesla rolls up to a gas station and you try to put diesel in it, it's not going to work. And in the same way, our bodies, this sexuality that God has given us is for a divine reason. We need to understand something. Sex in the way it's supposed to be done in a marriage bed between a man and a woman, this is what happens. The two become one. What I mean by that, they literally produce one being. To multiply as God called us to do. To be fruitful. To multiply. So that my kingdom will reign through you here on earth. You are a holy priesthood, set apart. And we need to understand something. There are things in this world that are under the ban. We are not to touch. We are not to entertain. We are not to just go into those places, those spaces. Because in those things there is destruction to come. Church, please understand something. A life devoted to the Lord is an obedient life that desires to do as He says, because we live under a law, but not a law that takes freedom, but a law of liberty that gives freedom. And this law, the freedom that we've been given, we can rejoice. We don't have to be burdened by destruction, by guilt, by pain, because we live a new way of living. And that living is by the word of God and the spirit of truth within us. We are set apart, church. We are set apart. Genesis 12:3 says, and in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed through Israel. Now, I'm going to sum it up real quick, y'all. We're almost there. Verses 20 through 21, there's a lot of suggestions as to how this happens. A lot of people, when they read the Bible and there's miracles that happen, people scratch their head and try to explain the miracle, which I get. That's natural. That's what we want to do. A lot of people see that this wall fell and they'll say an earthquake. Earthquake did it. Sure, it's possible. Yeah. Earthquake could have. Or maybe the Israelite soldiers, they undermined the walls while they were marching, so there was a distraction while other ones were like ripping out, but we don't see that written, okay? Vibrations, okay, this one's good. Vibrations set up by the trumpet blasts and soldiers' shouts cause the collapse. Have you ever had a bunch of people like try to shout and a wall fall down? Okay, cool. Or shock waves. Shock waves. Those soldiers were marching, baby. Those shock waves, you know, they could cause the walls to fall down. You know what? Maybe. Sure. Maybe. Yeah. But what I love about the Bible is that at the end of the day, if you believe God created all things, that is a big statement in and of itself. If you believe that, if you are a firm believer that God created, big statement. If you believe that, and you also understand that God interacts with His creation, you see that evident, right? Yeah, okay. Now, if God interacts with His creation, then you also have to believe in the fact that miracles do happen. They do. And what's awesome is when God shows up and intervenes in a miraculous way, showing off, really is what He's doing, showing off His authority, man, that has to make you understand something, that you believe in a God that is capable, that is able to do miraculous, amazing, mighty things. He is able. We have that God that we believe in. But this word, we're almost there, fell down flat. Fall down in Hebrew is Nepal, or to fall, okay? Fell down flat. This Hebrew word of flat is tahat, the under part or underneath, the beneath. It fell down, but it also fell down beneath, okay? It fell down beneath. This Hebrew word carries suggestion that it fell beneath itself, meaning that even the structure underneath was able to fall, but the walls were able to fall underneath the retaining wall. They fell off the wall, underneath the wall. Think about this. If they fell underneath, over, and under the wall, it would create a ramp into the city. It would create a ramp into the city. There is actual evidence of this. Kathleen Kenyon led an excavation team in the 1950s and documents this very thing. She says, fallen red bricks piling nearly to the top of the revetment, which is the retaining wall. These probably came from the wall on the summit of the bank. Interesting. The brick wall above the revetment, meaning it fell. Nice. Cool. The walls fell down, allowing the Israelites to be able to invade into the city. That is so cool. Okay, they invade into the city, and we get the story of Rahab. Please go read about her. Go read about Rahab and the faith that she had, because Rahab is a story of amazing grace. Rahab and her story makes me just smile. But let's end on this. A German excavation in 1907 and 1909 found that the north stretch of the lower city wall did not fall as everywhere else. Interesting. An excavation team around 1907 and 1909 found something on the north side. The north wall, there was an area that did not fall. A portion of that mud brick wall was still standing to the height of over 8 feet tall. Interesting. What is more, there were houses built against the wall in that area. It is quite possible that this is where Rahab's house was. We find out that Rahab in the story in chapter 2 of Joshua, she put out a red cord. This red cord was her house, where she was. We see that all the walls fall except the area where Rahab was. Her walls stayed strong as a protection from the coming wrath of God. A scarlet cord in the window of her house was what protected her from the coming wrath. As you read about her story in Joshua chapter 2, what you will learn from that story is God's unwavering grace and how even the furthest off can be brought close to the Lord. Rahab was a harlot. How she earned her money was in not good ways. But even her, she was brought into the family of God. The most important quality of Rahab was her faith in God. As you find out, Rahab said something so profound in chapter 2, verses 11. For the Lord God, He is God in heaven and above and on earth beneath. She believed in God, Yahweh. And that belief saved her, but not only her, her whole family. Her whole family. She believed in that God so much that she even had the guts to ask, will you spare me? She believed in that God so much that she was able to ask, will you save me? My question to you today, do you have the guts to ask, God, would you spare me? God, would you save me? God, I believe in you. I believe that your Son came to this earth. There's evidence of it. There's more writing about this character named Jesus. If you go and read other than the Bible, read other things, what you will find out? Jesus is everywhere. His miracles are written about everywhere. Do you believe in Abraham Lincoln? Why? Because there's writings and evidence that he lived. Guess what? There is evidence of Jesus. All you need to do is search for yourself. But what breaks my heart is a lot of people are not willing to search. But if searching was the way to salvation, to save you, why wouldn't you want to search? If the option was to die and life ended and everything just dissolved. But what if there was the chance that there is a God? What do you have to lose by searching? What do you have to lose by seeking? And if you have not sought the Lord, man, today I want to ask you to seek after Jesus. But if you understand and you are starting to believe God is working in your heart, in your thoughts, in your mind, if God is moving and rearranging things in your life, but maybe you don't understand everything, that's okay. All Rahab understood was the land was promised to the Israelites and that there was and is and forevermore a God.